We're going to be looking at our value practice worksheet today. And if you take a look at this, you'll notice we have 4 sections on here. We're going to talk about, you want to make sure you have a flat surface or a smooth surface under the area you are working on. Our first one is going to be hatching. So you're going to have 4 different sections, and we want it to look like it's getting darker every time we work on this as we're going across. So one of the ways to do that is to make sure that they are getting closer to one another as they go across. So on the first one, you're going to want to keep your lines nice and far apart. Now you can choose to do hatching parallel in any direction you would like. I happen to be going vertically. You could also do horizontally. You could do diagonally. As long as those lines are parallel and equal distance away from one another and they're never going to cross over each other, you are fine. So then I did 1, 2, 3, 4 in here. So then in the next section, I would want to double that amount. So if I did 4, then I would add 1 in between each time. And as you can see, as you get further away, it's starting to look like that rectangle is a little bit darker. And then the next one, I'm going to get even closer together as I work my way across. And you can be following along at home as I do this. And then by the time I get to the very last one, I want them to be as close together as possible, but not actually touching or crisscrossing each other. And this section gets to be a lot harder. You have to slow it down. But you can see the value is increasing. It looks lighter here, but by the time we get all the way over here to this box, it's looking a lot darker. So we're creating that value. We're not pushing harder or more gently with our pen or a marker. It doesn't make a difference because a marker is going to make the same mark the whole time for us, but we're getting those closer together. The next one is cross hatching. And you're going to do that by adding different directions of lines. So this time you are going to cross over those lines. So for example, the first one I might start with is going to be those vertical lines, and then I'm going to cross over them with horizontal lines. Okay, so that would be the first cross hatching, because cross hatching means to cross over those hatch lines, right? And then the second one, I'm not going to add more lines. I'm going to keep those original 4 that I had and the 3 crossbars that I had, but then I'm going to change directions again for my third line. So now you can see it's starting to look darker. So 2 lines, 3 lines. I'm going to do the same thing here. So I have to copy the first one I did. I had 4, and then I had 3, and then I went this direction. So this was this box into here. Now I have to add another line. So I'm going to add a 4th line going another direction. And as you can see, the more directions we overlap these lines, doing a little out of order this time, but the more directions we go with these overlapping lines, the darker it's going to look. Now here's the tricky part, because I've done my vertical, my horizontal, my straight 45-degree angle diagonals both ways. Now I have to go off kilter just a little bit more someplace else to add a new direction to make that box look even darker. So again, we're going from light to dark. We're creating value, but still using a marker. So I'm not pushing harder or softer. We're just adding more lines or different directions. The next one is pointillism, which you will start with really far apart. And pointillism is just a point. So that's what we're going to do, our little dots. And then we have so many in here. You want to get about double that in the next one. And this is why it's easier to do this with marker. With pencil, you have to like stop and draw little circles. But with a marker, you can just dot, dot, dot. And then by the time you get to this one, they're going to be getting a lot closer together. Now the key is you don't want them to touch. You want to keep them not touching. And by the time you get to the last box, they're going to be really close together but not touching. Now they're not as close together as they would be if you were working on a final piece of art. You would get those so close together they're not touching, but they would almost look like they're creating a black space because they are so close. And then you really have to slow down. when they start getting this close, if you don't want them to touch each other or overlap. Because when you do like this one right here, you can see I accidentally touch those two together. Well, now it doesn't look like a dot anymore. It looks like a little 8. And this does bounce your table quite a bit when you're working on this. And I'm still doing this gently. I'm not pushing really hard. I don't want to smush the tip of my marker. I want to keep it pointy, so when I go to use it for other things, it's still going to work for me. Now the next one is a gradient. This is where you are going to switch over to a pencil or colored pencil. That's up to you. But now we're going with pressure that can go from hard to light. So harder pressure, of course. And I like to tip my pencil sideways when I do this, because then I can color this whole side of my pencil instead of just the tip. It'll take me forever to color on the tip. If I point it sideways, I can color a large space much faster. If I want to make sure I don't go outside the line, I can put my fingernail here, and you can hear it tapping my fingernail. That stops it along that line. I'm going to go back over it because I want it to be nice and dark for that darkest one. And you can always tilt your paper, switch it around if you need to. Nothing says you have to keep your paper the same direction the whole time. My table is a little bumpy. I have a few sheets of paper under here, but you can see a little bit of that texture of my table coming through on there. I'm going to slow down, go along this edge. Another way to do this is to back way down your pencil, and then you can color a little bit more on that side. I want it to be nice and dark. I'm going to try to go through and try and even that out a little bit. So then for the next box over, you want it to be a little lighter. So I'm not going to press as hard, but I definitely want to fill it in. And I want to keep it nice and smooth if I can. That's the hardest part, especially when you're over here and you're overlapping a little bit. It is going to create a little bit of line in there, and I'll show you in a minute how you can take care of that. Okay, so we have it a little bit lighter. Not a whole lot, but enough you can tell the difference between the two. I'm going to go even lighter over here so I get even further down my pencil to lay it on the side, and I'm being super gentle. I'm hardly pushing at all on that pencil. But I want to get nice and smooth. And on the last one, I'm just barely touching. You probably can't even see it on the camera. It's so light on that last one. Now if you want to go through and smooth these out, take your finger and you can kind of rub it and go from one to the other. And this will help smooth it out and give you that nice gradation. So there we go. So we have our hatching, our cross-hatching, our pointillism, and then our gradient with pencil. Down here it says you select one of the value methods above to demonstrate how you would use it to make this circle shape into a form. So we want to make this look 3D like a sphere. Pay attention to the arrow. It shows you that the light is coming from this direction and heading over here, which means this part needs to stay white like it is because that's where the light's going to bounce off of it and have a reflection, but this is going to be your darker edge. So you can pick which one you want to do. If you want to do hatching, cross-hatching, pointillism, or gradient. I'm going to show you what it looks like with hatching for this particular one. So you would go through, initially, think of your hatching far apart, right? Just like we start with this one, so you just have the one really far apart, okay? Then you're gonna want them to start getting closer together as they move across that sphere. And they may even be broken up. They don't have to be one continuous line. Could choose to break them up, but they're getting closer and closer. And then again on that next line down, I'm gonna get them even closer to one another. I'll work some in between. This is where having a really fine tip marker is handy. Mine's not quite as pointy as yours is in your kit, but you get the idea where you want to get really thin lines in at the bottom by the time you get down there. And then I'm going to have just a few up here. So you can see that it's looking rounded like a sphere because it has that nice rounded look to it even though it's in the hatching. And then of course down here, you're going to have your cast shadow, which should be really close to one another to do a little shadow down there on the ground, right? Now, if you wanted to take this and you wanted to transfer this into a cross hatching, that would be easy enough. You would go through and you could add additional perpendicular marks to it. Same for down here with the cast shadow, like that. And then if you still wanted it even darker, right, we could go through at another angle on that edge and make it really dark. Don't want to lose my little specks there. So that would be a cross hatching. If you were going to do the sphere with the dots, similarly, you'd start far away from each other, but then as you work towards that edge, the dots are going to get really close to one another. I'm doing a tiny one, which is much harder to do than the larger one with this. But you still get the idea of what it would be with the dots, right? Like that. So that would be the pointillism. And then, of course, if you were going to do it with pencil, you would have it here, cast shadow with the pencil, you color in really dark. And this angle, I always start with my darkest edge when I'm doing these and go lighter. Because the really fun thing about the pencil that you can work with too is you can always go in with your finger and then smooth it out. It actually draws some of it up in there, and then make sure you go back in and add your reflection point though, because that light's going to reflect. You need to keep it white until it gets to that reflection point. So then you're going to take a picture of your sheet and upload it for grading.